You gotta stick the landing right. I mean, the final moments of a movie are going to resonate with the audience more than any other part, and thus the film industry puts a great deal of effort into getting that last scene just perfect, often screening multiple endings for test audiences to gauge their reactions. Some of these tragically go unseen for years, but thankfully most eventually do end up on Blu-rays and YouTube, so horror fans down the line like us can see what could have been. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are alternative horror movie endings you didn't see. Ash Sleeps Too Long, Army of Darkness. Which ending is considered canon for Army of Darkness depends on which side of the pond you're from. In the UK, we got the ending which the Americans consider to be the alternate one. Here, Ash, the cowardly but tenacious numbnuts, is victorious in the battle against the Deadites, but is still lost 600 years in the past. Given the opportunity to return home, he drinks one too many drops of a sleeping potion and consequently wakes up in a post-apocalyptic nightmare, replete with famous trashed landmarks Roland Emmerich style. On release, this of course left UK fans brimming on the possibility of a fourth movie, which would disappointingly never be made, at least not in the way that we thought. The US ending, however, transports Ash safely back to the S-Mart department store, still trying to impress the girls. Director Sam Raimi then decides to remind us that despite all the sword and sandal malarkey, this is very much still Evil Dead territory. So cue the Deadites, cue the shotgun, and cue the best one-liners since Arnie's 80s heyday. Morbius vs. Blade. Wesley Snipes' Blade is definitely one of the more successful adaptations in the early attempts at filming some of Marvel's lesser-known characters. And there were actually two alternate endings to this flick. The first, seen on the DVD release, was the original ending from the script, later replaced in the theatrical cut by an energetic sword fight between Blade and the big bad himself, Deacon Frost. This alternate take actually sees Frost becoming a vampire god, but it's not what we expect. Essentially, it's just a big blood tornado that looks completely naff in the terrible early CGI work of the time. The second, more intriguing alternate and additional finale, though, would have seen the live-action debut of Morbius, the living vampire and biochemist transformed by the side effects of a typical Marvel science experiment gone wrong. Here, he pops up from a distance to tease a potential Blade 2 appearance, bizarrely played by the director himself, Stephen Norrington. Mike's Differing Fates, 1408. In 1408, Mike Enslin is a depressed writer who, after the death of his daughter, has taken to churning out pulp garbage on America's most haunted hotels. When an anonymous postcard piques his curiosity, he decides to visit room 1408 in New York's Dolphin Hotel, despite attempts to dissuade him by the hotel manager Mr. Orlin due to 56 people having died in that very room. Apparitions, paintings that come to life, and extreme hallucinations of his dead daughter all lead to Mike torching the room himself within it. The theatrical cut ends with his funeral and Orlin listening to the voice of Mike's dead daughter on a dictaphone, proving the existence of the supernatural. There are, however, not one but two alternative endings. The first, in which Mike survives the ordeal, reunited with his estranged wife. This time they both hear their daughter's voice, again proving Mike's story of ghostly experiences within the room, with the added positivity of a marriage rekindled. In the second one, Mike still dies, but here the closing sequence has Sam, Mike's lawyer, finding the dictaphone whilst reading a manuscript written by Mike in 1408. Sam's office door slams and is followed by the voice of Mike's father, repeating a line from earlier that alludes to his dementia. Chris goes to jail, get out. Jordan Peele is one of those annoying, hard-working, talented types who's good at everything, and I'm definitely not jealous of, having made one of the best horror movies in Get Out. This is a film with an effective yet simple setup. When Chris is invited to spend the weekend with his girlfriend Rose's parents, he has one question. Do they know I'm black? Things for him don't go well, and even worse, Rose, her mum, and her father aren't exactly who they claim to be. For years, they have been helping people transfer their consciousness to younger, fitter bodies, taking over and ultimately suppressing the host's personality. Chris thankfully makes it out alive, and after a final confrontation with Rose, is rescued on the road by his pal Rod. The good guys win, and everything is rosy. In the alternate ending, though, things are considerably more downbeat, and yet perhaps more in keeping with Peele's original intentions behind the film's message on systemic racism. Here, Chris still defeats Rose with a shotgun but is picked up by the cops and taken straight to jail, where Rod pays him a visit. In this ending, he's just another black man behind bars, silently seething with the injustice of his incarceration. He walks away from the glass, leaving Rod hanging on the prison phone. Carrie is reborn. Carrie 2013. Carrie 2013 was always going to be a hard sell. Brian De Palma's 1976 Carrie is kind of perfect, so full kudos to director Kimberly Peirce for even having a crack at it at all. Star Chloe Grace Moretz does a fine job in the title role too, even if she is perhaps a little bit miscast and never quite nails the nuances of Sissy Spacek's abused teen with lethal powers of telekinesis. The original ending for the remake was a pretty ineffective rehash of the 1976 legendary jump scare. Here, Sue Snell, a surviving teen with a guilty conscience, visits Carrie's grave, placing a white rose upon the headstone and leaves, right before the stone cracks and Carrie can be heard screaming from beyond the grave. For the Blu-ray release though, someone decided that they could do better than this, and this time a pregnant Sue places the flower, and we then immediately transition to her 9 months in the future giving birth. Here, out pops Carrie's bloody hand instead of a baby, grabbing Sue's arm and surprising the audience. Fortunately, it's not a real birth, and Sue then wakes up from the nightmare in the arms of her mother, resembling the 1976 finale, certainly in style, if not in substance. Evan Gets Revenge, Knock Knock. Knock Knock is an absolute bonkers movie. It follows two women who happen upon the house of Keanu Reeves' Evan, a married father who's currently home alone, and then invite themselves in. Inside, the two seduce Evan and then make his life hell after they all have sex, claiming to be underage and threatening to phone the police unless he lets them do pretty much whatever the hell they want to his place. After a series of increasingly outlandish escalations, the film ends with Evan buried and trapped in the garden, with only his little head poking out the ground. At this point, his two assailants reveal that they're not really underage and have done this to a bunch of men before him. Rather than kill him like they threatened to previously, they instead leave him trapped for his family to find, and then upload a video of him shagging one of the girls to his socials. They're not done yet though, as in the ultimate act of villainy, they then steal his dog. This ending, as you might imagine, is a total bummer, with the tricked Evan having to face the wrath of his family returning home to a complete mess. However, an alternate finale features an epilogue where Evan actually tracks the girls down by using the GPS on his dog's collar. Here, he finds them in the process of terrorizing yet another victim, with the film cutting to black as he knocks on the door. Norah escapes underwater. In the year 2050, Norah is an engineer on a deep-sea drilling operation rig, which from the very opening is doomed to destruction. What her and her team don't know is that the literal Cthulhu straight from the pages of a Lovecraft horror and all of his imaginatively realized gelatinous minions are pulling the station apart and devouring the survivors. Consequently, a desperate escape attempt ensues. Norah and chums have to climb down a thing and swim through another thing to eventually get to the thing that'll take them back to the surface. At this point though, Norah takes one for the team and stays behind to detonate the reactor core, as there's a severe lack of escape pods left, taking both her and Godzilla's slimier big brother to a watery grave. In the alternative ending, however, she restores power to the final escape pod, using her locket chain to fix the circuit, in a nice callback to some personal tragedy, that being the loss of her partner, that her character experiences off-screen. The theatrical ending is downbeat and sacrificial, and the alternate ending has a more resounding message of hope and survival, so it's kind of down to personal taste on this one really. Either way, the end credits had implied a potential sequel, but sadly Underwater 2 Cthulhu Takes Manhattan is still yet to materialize. Death by Helicopter Blades, Dawn of the Dead, 1978. Dawn of the Dead is an iconic movie, and we all know the setup at this point. A bunch of survivors holed up in a mall during a zombie apocalypse, and shenanigans ensue. In the end, after the mall comes under siege by some villainous humans, remaining survivors, Francine and Peter, make a daring rooftop escape via helicopter. There was, however, a much more downbeat ending in which both commit suicide, with some footage acting as a precursor to those events making it into the final cut. Peter originally was to blow his brains out with a snub-nosed pistol. He actually raises the gun to his head but changes his mind in the final cut, and Fran, now this would have been gnarly, was to put her face right into the blades of a helicopter. The film then would have concluded with the engine of the craft slowly winding down, now out of fuel, and giving the impression that even if they had survived, they would have ended up crashing somewhere anyway. I don't think I would have preferred this ending, but man, I really wish this footage existed. Elizabeth's horrifying survival. Leatherface. 2017's Leatherface gave us the definitive backstory to the character despite nobody really asking for it. Here, Leatherface, real name Jedediah Sawyer, is institutionalized after the arrest of his psycho parents, who some years later break him out and go on a killing spree, resulting in the creation of the infamous dead skin mask. The theatrical finale sees poor nurse Elizabeth, once a friend to Leatherface, decapitated in spectacular fashion in the woods, before he uses the lower half of her face to stitch onto his eponymous visage. The alternate ending is actually way nastier and more in keeping with the horror on display in the previous movies, especially the original's meat hook shenanigans. Now trapped in the Sawyer house, any thoughts poor Elizabeth has of running away are soon eliminated when Leatherface takes her left leg off with his trusty two-stroke carving knife. Cut to the scene of him constructing his new face with Elizabeth hanging in the barn, minus a leg and now minus the lower half of her face, but admittedly, very much still alive. Yeah, I mean, talk about fates worse than death, eh? The butterfly baby, The Fly. Okay, so quick recap for the uninitiated. In The Fly, Jeff Goldblum plays a scientist who becomes genetically fused with a housefly while attempting to perfect teleportation technology. It's a weird movie, but the original cut was even stranger. The famous and quite disgusting monkey cat deleted scene is available online, and luckily an alternate ending is too, which never made it to the final theatrical version. This scene gives a more subjectively optimistic conclusion to an otherwise depressingly bleak drama about the perils of science and the inevitability of death. After Seth's demise at the hands of Veronica and a reluctantly but well-placed shotgun blast to the head, she picks up her relationship with her boss/editor and total creep and is now pregnant with his child. As she sleeps, she dreams of a chrysalis within her womb, which slowly peels open to reveal a baby with beautiful butterfly wings. It's a visually striking, albeit visually weird sequence, but it does succeed in some small way to soothe your traumatized brain after 2 hours of acid puke nightmare-soaked violence.
Ben lives, Night of the Living Dead. The death of Dwayne Jones's Ben is one of the most depressing in horror history. Having seemingly survived against all odds as the ghouls of the night and the living dead run rampant, Ben is shot and killed after being mistaken for one of the shuffling undead. Now, originally, writers John Russo and George A. Romero envisioned an ending where Ben survives to live another day. Instead, though, they ended up on settling on an ending where Ben was shot and thrown on a fire with the ghouls. So why didn't we get the happy ending? Well, that all comes down to Dwayne Jones. As he explained to The Wrap back in 2010, he was one who petitioned Russo and Romero to not have that happy ending. For Jones, he thought that Night of the Living Dead would be more impactful and memorable if his character died at the end. As he put it, I convinced George that the black community would rather see me dead than saved, after all that had gone on in a corny and symbolic, confusing way. The heroes never die in American movies. The jolt of that and the double jolt of the hero being black seemed like a double-barreled whammy. Freddy Jr.? Freddy versus Jason. Having been talked about for years, Freddy Krueger of the Elm Street franchise and Jason Voorhees of the Friday the 13th series finally butted heads in 2003 with Ronnie Yu's Freddy vs. Jason. Taking place across the infamous Springwood and Camp Crystal Lake locales so often stalked by Krueger and Voorhees, this matchup results in a brilliant final act war. After roughing each other up, the end sees Freddy decapitated by final girl Laurie, and the two rogues fall into Crystal Lake. By the following morning, Jason emerges from the lake with the winking head of Krueger in his grasp as the credits hit. Now, for test audiences and those who own the 2-disc special edition DVD, they actually got to see a very different ending that had a scene where Laurie and boyfriend Will are about to have sex, but once Will acts a little rough, his hand turns into one mirroring Freddy's famed blades. With it unclear if Will was possessed, had become a new Freddy, or whether this was just a dream of Laurie's, the decision was made to scrap this ending. Paxton becomes a monster. Hostile. Hostel is a grim, depressing movie, that is for sure, yet this alternate ending somehow makes the picture even more, well, grim and depressing. In this Eli Roth film, two of the friends of Jay Hernandez's Paxton are killed as he himself is tortured in some pretty twisted ways at the hands of the nefarious elite hunting group. For Paxton, he's fortunate enough to temporarily escape the clutches of the disturbing elite hunting group, an organization that auctions off people to be tortured. Closing out the 2005 original, Paxton makes it onto a train that stops in Vienna. There, he spots the Dutch businessman who killed his buddy Josh and thus follows DB into a public bathroom and murders him before hopping onto another train. So how could you make Hostel even more troubling, I hear you ask? Why? Well, you have an alternate ending where Paxton kidnaps a child. Yeah, in this variant final scene, Paxton spots the aforementioned Dutch businessman character at a train station with his young daughter. After the unnamed Dutchman goes to the restroom, he returns to find his offspring missing. As he holds her teddy bear and screams out for her, the audience sees a clearly troubled Paxton restraining the girl in a train that soon departs the station. Katie gets gunned down. Paranormal Activity. So part of that Paranormal Activity buzz was due to how the flick leaked online a solid 18 months before the film hit cinemas, with that leaked cut having a vastly different finale to what became the official version of Paranormal Activity. The end of the first Paranormal Activity has Katie spending her hours staring at her sleeping boyfriend. Going downstairs, a scream from Katie has him wake up and rush to her assistance. Following an off-screen wail, audiences witness the lifeless body being thrown directly at the camera by Katie, and the picture ends as a demonic Katie lunges at the viewer. Now, this ending was put in place once Paramount picked up Paranormal Activity, but those who'd acquired the film previously were given an ending where Katie just winds up dead. Before she does that, we get the same sequence of the boyfriend following Katie downstairs where he's killed, but this time Katie returns to the bedroom and rocks back and forth until the following morning. When the police turn up at the scene, they find the possessed Katie holding a knife, with the slamming door of the attic startling a policeman who shoots her dead. Alex sacrifices himself and Claire gives birth. Final Destination. The original Final Destination finished up with 3 survivors in the shape of Alex Browning, Claire Rivers, and Carter Horton. And in the alternate ending, there are still technically 3 survivors, but Alex isn't one of them. In the finished film, we saw Alex chasing Claire from being blown to bits in his car after he grabs the electrical cables that are about to take her life. There, we skip ahead to see Alex, Claire, and Carter vacationing in Paris for a not-so-happy ending. For the alternate ending, not only was Alex to be taken by death in the explosive car set piece, but the movie then jumps ahead to see Claire giving birth to the pair's son. From there, Claire, her newborn, and Carter visit Alex's grave to pay their respects. If Final Destination would have used this alternative finale, they would have changed the very concept of the franchise, with Claire having survived due to bringing new life into the world, and Carter surviving because the final target of death, as in Alex, was taken out of the equation. Dr. Wells' son strikes out. Godsend. In 2004's Godsend, Paul and Jesse Duncan are a couple whose son is killed a day after his 8th birthday. When Robert De Niro's Wells approaches with the offer of cloning their boy Adam, they eventually and reluctantly agree to move forward with this procedure. Once Godsend gets going, the new Adam's erratic behavior is revealed to be because the cloning process had mixed the original Adam's DNA with that of Zachary. And who the hell's Zachary? Why, that's the disturbed, deceased son of Robert De Niro's Wells, a boy who burned down his school, killed his mother, and then burnt himself alive with her corpse in their family abode, aka a right wrong'un. Due to Wells not having enough of Zachary's DNA to fully clone his dead son, he required the DNA of another youngster in order to try and duplicate his offspring. The finale had the Duncans move to a new neighborhood, with Adam's behavior subsequently picking up. Well, technically it is implied that Zachary is back in control as the film ends. But here's the real kicker. This film actually had 4 alternate endings, and one of them sees De Niro's Wells killed after Adam injects him with poison. When Paul then stops Adam from killing Jesse, he tries to strangle his air quote son, but is stopped by his wife. There, the film wraps up with the Duncans at the grave of their real son, while the clone watches on. Are you confused by that? Yeah, me too. Mia is still possessed. Evil Dead. Rather than merely a group of pals and lovers heading out into the woods for some quality time and partying, the Evil Dead 2013 redo saw its central characters take out into the wild as part of an attempt to help one of them overcome her drug problems. Of course, demonic Necronomicon shenanigans unravel, with Mia being the sole survivor of the film as this Evil Dead offering ends with her stumbling out into the woods, quickly followed by a post-credits groovy from the one and only Ashley J. Williams. In an alternative ending, she makes her way to the road where she's picked up by a passerby. With the camera in tight on her face, we see her character open her eyes in a way that suggests that she's still possessed. Likewise, this ending also had David, her brother who sacrificed himself to save her in the theatrical cut, possessed by the evil spirits of the picture. Incidentally, the director has also made mention how one planned ending he had was for Mia to be taken over to an extent that her body literally exploded. Those plans were dashed, however, when Sam Raimi stepped in to talk the director out of it. Esther carries on her act. Orphan. Now, Orphan is famed for having one of the most bonkers horror twists of the past 20 years. The big swerve here is that this sweet and innocent youngster, who the Coleman family adopt, is in reality a deranged, murderous 33-year-old who suffers from a rare hormone disorder. By the time the cat is out of the bag, the killer, whose real name is Lena, has killed a nun, faked child abuse, and put adoptive brother Daniel in the hospital, before eventually killing the family patriarch John. It comes down to Kate Coleman to finally put a stop to her rampage as she boots the little loon in the jaw and then lets her freeze to death in an icy lake. But in an alternate version of Orphan's ending, Kate and Lena don't actually end up in that icy locale. Instead, takes a different path from that moment in the theatrical cut, where Kate falls from a roof onto Lena to stop her from killing the 5-year-old Max Coleman. Then Orphan skips ahead to a scene of Lena in her bedroom, doing her makeup in order to have her look like the 9-year-old that she continued to claim to be. The police arrive on the scene as this imposter plays nice, with it implied that she may have killed Kate and Max. Duddits goes out with a bang. Dreamcatcher. Lawrence Kasdan's Dreamcatcher is a strange beast. On paper, the Stephen King source material and impressive core ensemble of Timothy Oliphant, Thomas Jane, Jason Lee, Damian Lewis, Donnie Wahlberg, and Morgan Goddamn Freeman should have made for movie gold, but instead, the final result was a total disappointment. Largely focused on 4 pals whose hunting trip goes completely tits up when they encounter some parasitic aliens who are intent on contaminating the world's water supply, this 2003 picture concludes with a confrontation between James Henry, Wahlberg's Duddits, and Lewis's possessed Jonesy. Revealing himself to be an alien too, Duddits draws out the big worm freak from Jonesy and the two collide in a puff of colour resembling a dream catcher. Then Jonesy stamps on the last surviving worm, the end. But in an alternate ending for the movie, which has been included as bonus material on certain home releases of Dreamcatcher, Duddits ends up using some special ability to take out the final worm before passing away from leukemia. After that, audiences are left with a shot of Duddits' friends visiting his grave. Erin dies. Youre Next. In the form of Youre Next's Erin, we got one of the greatest modern-day horror protagonists. A total badass who grew up on a survival compound, Erin turns the tables on the masked attackers of Adam Wingard's movie, going from hunted to hunter. From Erin, there's death by blender, death by meat tenderizer, and a wide array of brilliant, brutal traps that would make Kevin McAllister proud. By the time Youre Next concludes, everybody is dead apart from Erin, with it having been revealed how her fella Crispin was part of the plan to off most of his family in order to get a hefty inheritance. After killing Crispin, Erin is shot in the shoulder by a policeman, but survives after that cop is taken out by an axe-swinging booby trap. A blood-splattered Youre Next hits the screen, and that's it for this fantastic feature. But as revealed by director Wingard, he originally intended for Youre Next to have a slightly different ending. Yes, Erin would emerge victorious from the Davison family abode, and yes, she would kill all of her attackers and her underhand boyfriend, but the difference here, though, is that the policeman who arrives on the scene would have actually shot her dead. While this ending was indeed filmed, Wingard decided against using it in the final cut of the movie.